Gonzaga and St. Mary's once again look like the teams to beat in the WCC. Will anyone rise up and challenge the two conference stalwarts?
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Happy Thursday, and welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is brought to you by Game Time, folks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege, and you will get $20 off your first purchase. Well, I'm thrilled to be joined today by Zack Farmer, the host of the Unofficial WCC Hoops podcast. You can find that on Unoff WCC Pod on Twitter. You can find Zach on Twitter at Post by Zach. He's on Instagram as well. Here to give us an early season recap of what's been going on around the West Coast Conference. We'll talk about each team a little bit, although we'll focus primarily on Gonzaga and St. Mary's, and then talk more about the two newcomers, Washington State and Oregon State, how they've looked so far this season. Zach, let's start with Gonzaga, the team at the top of your recent WCC power rankings, the only team that is ranked in the conference so far. We'll talk about whether that might change as the season goes on. Gonzaga, of course, 38-point win over Baylor on opening day, really sent to the college basketball world that they are here and they're ready to compete for a national championship. Then they didn't look quite as good in that second game against Arizona State. Nice thing for Mark Few and the Zags is they have the depth that when their starting lineup maybe doesn't perform as expected, they can bring in guys like Braden Huff and guys like last year's WCC scoring champ, Michael Ajayi, and get things done and secure victory. What have you seen for Gonzaga so far, and does this look like a team legitimately capable of contending for an Elite Eight, Final Four, potentially national championship?
I mean, everything we saw in the first week, I think, kind of stands up to everything that everyone has kind of been predicting about this squad. Mm-hmm. This was a top 10 team before the season began. It was a top 10 team, in the middle of the summer. And obviously right out the gate, we saw them just like kick the living hell out of Baylor. So immediately you get to see that what the high ceiling potential is for this team when they have everything going, because it really did seem like they had all of it going on night one. Mm-hmm. But of course, you don't expect that to be the case every single time out. And we saw a little bit more of that against Arizona State. But the really good signs really is that the depth of this team is showing early returns. Mm-hmm. Again, you mentioned Michael Ajayi and what he's been able to bring. Braden Huff coming off the bench, he's been so much better than a year ago. And he was good offensively last season, and you could just see the steps that he has taken, the progression that he's had. And coming in when Graham Ike has been in a little bit of foul trouble and whatnot. So that's been great to see. Even like the likes of Dusty Stromer, he looks far more comfortable in this system. He looks like he is belonging. And of course, hard to overlook Caleb Battle and what he's been able to bring this first week or so, because he really has been something that Gonzaga has been missing for quite a long time. And having a guy who can get his own shot whenever he wants and drop 10, 12 points within a matter of minutes is really something that is good to see, because that's something you talk about what you need in the tournament to get deeper and deeper. You need that guard play and that's something that he's going to bring. And of course, still some things to work on. The defense wasn't as great on Sunday, but this is a Gonzaga team that looks very much the part of someone who's going to continue to grow, get better, and there's plenty of other opportunities in the non-conference.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you talk about a game where Nolan Hickman and Ben Gregg combined to shoot 1 of 9 from 3, and the team has issues with defensive rotations. Those two facts combined with Graham Ike getting in foul trouble. If you told fans that about a Gonzaga game last year, they lose that game. They almost always lose that game if those three things are true. But this year, they're able to withstand that. They can go to Braden Huff offensively. Last year, Braden Huff was very good against bad teams and was not nearly as good when they played higher quality opponents. Arizona State was a top 25 team in Ken Palm's adjusted defense, have one of the best young shot blockers in the country in Jaden Quintance, and Huff scored 21 off the bench. Those are the kind of things that I think for a lot of fans will be like, well, he had 20-point games last year. It's he wasn't doing that against these kinds of teams. And I think when you look at what that means for Gonzaga coming into the rest of their non-conference, of course, with, Kentucky and UConn and UCLA and San Diego State and teams like that. And then, of course, even coming into conference play, and in particular going up against St. Mary's, which I think is a good transition here. The Gaels 3-0 so far on the season, got a win over Akron on Tuesday evening, 19-point victory there. Also have wins over Towson and Chattanooga. And, I think for more casual fans, they're going to hear those three teams and be like, okay, well, are any of those teams good? Yeah, they're all pretty good, actually. They're all pretty good mid-major teams. You and I had a chance to speak to Randy Bennett at the WCC Media Day and talk kind of about his non-conference schedule and their strategy there of going out and finding some quality mid-major teams to play. And, of course, they have Nebraska coming up on Sunday as well, so get a chance to play a Big Ten team there. The big standout to me for this St. Mary's team from the little bit that I've seen of them, and of course scouting the box scores, has been the Arizona transfer, Paulius Murauskas, who's just looked fantastic. 18 points, 13 boards per game for him. I think we knew he was going to be a solid piece for this team, transferring from Arizona, and he played really well this summer with some of the Lithuanian teams. But I think there was a little tepid expectations that maybe we'll see how quickly he kind of assimilates to being on this roster and on this lineup. And Zach, it's been pretty darn quick. He's looked fantastic really early on for this team.
He really has. And I made the joke of like, Murauskas is Lithuanian for double-double, because that's really all he's done in his first three games. Double-double, double-double, double-double. Like, he really has been the most consistent player for St. Mary's through the first week and a half. You look at just the style that he's played, because honestly, like at Arizona, we saw more of his three-point shot. He was a very good three-point shooter. We haven't seen much of that yet at St. Mary's, but he's been in the paint. He knows how to position himself well. He still needs a little work on finishing around the basket and still needs a little bit more patience. But again, for a younger player, that's to be expected, that he's still going to continue to grow in that role. But he has been really kind of like one of the pieces they really needed to have. I mean, you lose Joshua Jefferson in the transfer portal this past year, and you needed someone to step into that role immediately. And he's been that guy. Averaging, I think it's now like 15 points, 13 rebounds. Like, it's kind of ridiculous what he's been able to do in his first week.
And I think it's funny, the comparison with Gonzaga in some ways of, Graham Ike hasn't been very good in Gonzaga's first two games, and Ben Gregg hasn't looked great. And you look at St. Mary's, and I wouldn't say that Marcelonis has been bad. He has not been bad, but he hasn't been quite as dominant. And Mitchell Saxon has had some foul trouble stuff and hasn't been on the floor as much. And yet St. Mary's has looked very good because of newcomers. And that's kind of similar to what we've seen with Gonzaga in some ways, with Battle and Ajayi, and as we talked about, Huff as well. And you look at St. Mary's, and Murauskas has been great. Mikey Lewis, another one of their newcomers, has been great, a freshman, shooting 14 points. 44% from three. And then Luke Barrett, who's kind of he's not exactly the same as Braden Huff. He's probably more of a Ben Gregg comparison for Gonzaga fans, but he's kind of taken that leap that I think St. Mary's really needed from him. He's 11 points and 8 boards, and it's only three games so far. But I think if you're a St. Mary's fan, you're excited about what the new guys look like. You're excited about Lewis and Murauskas, but I think you're pretty happy to see Luke Barrett playing well too.
Yeah, there's a lot of different roles for a lot of guys on this team. And I think these first 3 games, you've kind of started to see them reshape what that's starting to look like. Mikey Lewis, top 100 freshman from ESPN, like, he looks the part. Like, he is an instant bucket out there. He got in the game last night or on Tuesday against Akron, and he had 9 points within the first 60 seconds. When it happens fast, very much in a way of talk about Caleb Battle for Gonzaga. Like, Mikey Lewis is very similar in that way, obviously a much younger player and still has a lot to grow, but same sort of offensive punch. And it's funny, talk about Marcelonis, where maybe his numbers don't look the part. Like, if it weren't for Andrew Nemhard or Ryan Nemhard, he would be leading the conference in assists. He's averaging 8.7 assists a game through 3 games. That only because Nemhard has 11 per contest is that kind of overshadowing it. But yeah, there's a lot of depth. I like what Jordan Ross brings. I like what Harry Wessels has done in the early part of the season. Mitchell Saxon's been in foul trouble. So again, you've been able to see that depth. There's still some concerning thing on the defensive end, actually, for this squad. You actually look at the metrics right now. KenPom has them, I think it's 21 in offense, and they're in the 70s on defense. So we're kind of almost seeing the those old St. Mary's teams a little bit more, where they had that offensive punch and less so on the defensive end. Defense is still kind of getting there, but against Akron, 55 rebounds, which is a ridiculous number.
I'll be very curious. St. Mary's plays Nebraska on Sunday. Not a team that's expected to be super good this year, but it is still a high major opponent, a power opponent. If they win that game, they're 4-0 on the season. I'm not sure if that alone will get them back into the top 25. They've been picking up votes, but I feel like they're not quite there yet. Obviously, we've seen some teams that are ahead of them that are going to fall out. I'm curious. I think Oregon has been picking up about the same number of votes. That will probably change after their near loss to Portland, and I'm sure some other teams will fall too. But I think St. Mary's will end up getting ranked before the start of the conference slate. I think they're very likely to put themselves in a position to earn an at-large bid this year if they don't win the WCC tournament. Is that kind of your sense here? Does it feel like another year where the Gaels are kind of in and out of the top 25, hanging around in that spot and still get themselves into the big dance, regardless of whether they win the conference?
I think so. I mean, you look at the schedule. I mean, there are some bigger opportunities. They're going to be at the Acrisure Invitational. They have USC in that one in the opener. Then they'll either get New Mexico or I'm trying to blink. I think it was New Mexico or one other quality team that was going to be in that. And then also they have Boise State later in the non-conference. So they have other opportunities to kind of get back into that mix. But this is a team that it does feel like, even more so than last year, is going to fall under the radar for quite a while. Now, I don't think they're going to have nearly the struggle that they did last season. Because remember, like, they were 3-4 when they started getting into December, and it looked like the season was falling apart at one point. I don't think that's going to be the case this year. I think the schedule's been put together in a way that's going to suit them a little bit better. And also, again, when you look at the two anchors, Marshallonis and Saxon, being kind of like the leaders, and they know what their roles are this go around, I think that's going to be a team that is going to be hanging around the top 25. I don't know if they're going to quite break through by conference play, but as far as an at-large, like they know how to do this. They've done it time and time again. They know how to put the resume together. And in conference play, it's USF is going to be a good one. Santa Clara is going to be a good opportunity. Washington State. And of course, they're 4-4 against Gonzaga over the last 8 games, regardless of what, again, you throw out records or whatnot, because it's a rivalry game. And when they get to Moraga, when they head up to Spokane, you kind of all bets are off on that one.
Yeah, you should never, ever, ever assume that St. Mary's won't beat Gonzaga at least once, especially in traditionally when they play them 3 times. That's a fair bet there. For the record, it's USC, New Mexico, and then Arizona State is that other team. So very likely 2 NCAA tournament teams out of there, potentially 3, and St. Mary's will play 2 of them. So that's you're right. Going to set them up to potentially get some quality wins in that event. We're going to move on, though. You kind of touched on San Francisco and Santa Clara and those 2 new teams, WSU and Oregon State. So we're going to kind of talk about them. The Dons picked up a really nice win over Boise State. As of right now, Washington State and Oregon State both undefeated so far. We're going to talk about whether any of them can also challenge for an at-large bid, make a 3-bid WCC in 2025, coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, get ready to tackle the college hoops action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. And the FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything that you need to place live bets all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more, all on the same page where you place your bets. Right now, Gonzaga's odds to win the Battle for Atlantis are at plus 135 on FanDuel. Arizona's next at plus 170, with Indiana following at plus 600. If you like those odds, game odds are going to be out very soon for Gonzaga versus UMass Lowell and San Diego State next week. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. As a reminder, you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. It's FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, Zach, continuing our conversation here, looking down the WCC power rankings that you posted a few days ago. We talked Gonzaga, St. Mary's there in the first segment. Going to talk about 4 teams here in the second segment: San Francisco, Santa Clara, Washington State, and Oregon State. Just for those listening. We are recording this on Wednesday prior to San Francisco hosting Long Beach State and Santa Clara hosting North Dakota State. By the time you're listening to this, both those games will happen. We're feeling fairly confident that they'll go 2-0, but I also wouldn't have expected Portland to take Oregon to overtime, so who the heck knows? Ideally, both those teams will, of course, win those games as they are both winnable games. Zach, let's start with the Dons. Picked up a nice win over Boise State. Not a great win over Cal Poly in their first game, but that Cal Poly team's got a new coach, brand new system. Sometimes those games just trip you up a little bit early in the season. They still managed to win, took down Leon Rice and the Broncos. I know you had an opportunity to speak with Coach Gerlofson. What do you kind of make of this team, especially now after that really nice victory over a team that a lot of people have kind of top 25 aspirations on in Boise State?
I was really impressed with them, especially in the second half of that game, because this is a USF team that a year ago did everything that they were supposed to as far as beating the teams that they're scheduled to beat, but they struggled against the teams that were going to be those quote resume wins, including Boise State last season. They lost to Boise State up in Idaho a year ago, and this was one of those games I was circling because that front court from Boise is really imposing. They're a big team, and I wasn't sure how USF's new pieces or even their existing pieces were really going to be able to kind of compete with them. And they did a very good job of kind of hanging around with this group. I mean, Tyson Degengard still had 25 points in this contest, but really what it was let him get his and just stop everybody else, which is exactly what they were capable of doing, exactly what they did. They were +7 on the rebounding column. They held Boise to 40% shooting. This was a gritty win for USF. I really liked how Marcus Williams came alive in that second half. He had 14 of his 20 there. I really liked the defense from Duito Newberry. He was really good in that contest. Obviously, Malik Thomas was the player of the week, but a lot of his was getting this team going in that first half. And the freshman Tyson Riley, he is going to be a dude at some point. Like, he's fitting in really well right now with what USF needs. But as Coach Gerlofson was telling me, he's not a guy who needs the ball in his hands to impact the game. He's not a guy who needs to be told more than once to do certain things. So that's really promising for a freshman that kind of knows how to impact a game without needing to be a focal point of the offense or the defense. This is a USF team that is deeper than I thought it was at the beginning of the season, and they picked up resume win number 1. This is a squad that's I think we're going to be talking about deeper and deeper into the season.
Yeah. Mikey Lewis is probably your favorite for freshman of the year right now in the conference. But one of my favorite things about following the WCC is that, so many of the freshmen that come into this league are not ranked on 247 and they're not really very well known. So at the beginning of the season, these guys kind of pop and you're like, oh, look at this guy for San Francisco, or we'll talk about Austin Rapp from Portland or some of the other guys. You're like, oh, that guy looks really good in the early part of the season. And Riley's been a really nice addition for Gerlofson and the Dons. Their next game is on Saturday. They're hosting Chicago State. Should be another nice win for Chris Gerlofson. Want to move on and talk about Santa Clara a little bit. Beat St. Louis on opening day as part of that Field of 68 Invitational. Robbie Avila goes down with an injury for the Billikens late in that game, and it kind of helped Santa Clara be able to prevent St. Louis from coming back in that one. Santa Clara then lost to Arizona State, which looked like the worst loss, and then Arizona State played pretty well against Gonzaga, so it's possible Bobby Hurley's team is maybe going to be a little bit better than anticipated this season. Really nice performances for this team. The surprise for them has been Elijah Mahi, junior college transfer, who's averaging about 15 points per game. Obviously, their star player is Adama Alpha Ball. They get Carlos Stewart back, a team with a lot of continuity. They're playing Nevada on Saturday. Kind of what are your thoughts on this Santa Clara team as they kind of have been considered a team that could be competing for an at-large bid? I think that Arizona State loss obviously hurts them in that area, but Herb Sendek's squad looks very, very good on paper, at least in the early part of the season.
Yeah, this is a team I really liked before the season as a potential at-large team. And to this point, I mean, I'm probably not surprised by where we are right now. Like, I thought that they would get the game against St. Louis. That was a St. Louis team that is still learning a lot, new head coach, a lot of new players, everything else. So with the continuity that Santa Clara had, that was almost like a perfect scenario for them. St. Louis is going to get better. That's going to grow and grow as a good win for the Broncos. And yeah, and I kind of like pause and kind of cringe a little bit at the Arizona State loss, but then seeing them play Arizona State play against Gonzaga, I'm like, okay, maybe it's not nearly the disaster that it could be. But moving forward, like they have plenty of opportunities on the non-conference schedule. Santa Clara has all the pieces. To me, there's not much of the excuse anymore. Now it's show me. You have the pieces, you have the talent, you have really everything you could need to build a resume for that's capable of getting to the tournament. Now let's go and do it. You mentioned the game at Nevada. They have Stanford on the schedule, TCU, McNeese is on the schedule. That's going to be a big one. Bradley's on the schedule. That's another good one. So they've got to handle their business. They've got to not lose like those random games, like don't lose to Cal, don't lose to San Diego, those sorts of things. But they're set up. And if they can handle their business and do what I think they're capable of doing, there's a very good chance we hear their name called on Selection Sunday.
Yeah, the margin of error is very, very thin for Santa Clara. Again, that Arizona State loss does not help. This is a team that get four cracks at Gonzaga St. Mary's. They probably got to win. Probably got to win 2 of them, but better if you could win 3 of them. But more than that, you cannot lose to LMU. You cannot lose to Pacific or San Diego or really almost any of the other teams in this conference. I mean, you got to be really, really tight. And this team's capable of doing that, but it doesn't take much for them to suddenly fall out of that conversation. I want to talk about the 2 new teams in the WCC, Washington State and Oregon State, combined 6-0 for those 2 teams. Each are 3-0. Washington State's neither has played a great schedule. Washington State's played Portland State, Idaho, and Bradley. Only beat Portland State by 8, but had comfortable wins over the other 2. Meanwhile, Oregon State, all of their victories have been by 20-plus points, but they really haven't played anybody good. Utah Tech, Weber State, and then an NAIA school in Western Oregon. But still nice to see both these teams looking strong so far. Oregon State is obviously a much more difficult path to being in the at-large conversation than Wazoo, although I've liked what we've seen from the Beavers up to this point. But Washington State in particular, transfer Nate Calmise from UW is averaging just under 18 points a game and 5 assists. He's looked really good. Cedric Coward, who we had a chance to speak with at the media days, kind of the considered the NBA prospect on this team, potentially one of the better NBA prospects in the conference. He's been very good as well. 15 points, a little under 8 boards, shooting 46% from 3. He's also blocking 2.5 shots per game. That's the kind of skill set you like to see if you're an NBA scout. Again, the competition level hasn't been great, but looking at these 2 teams, looking at kind of the early going with them, what kind of stands out about them and their potential to not only compete for an at-large bid, but to compete against the likes of Gonzaga and St. Mary's and the other kind of stalwarts at the top of the WCC?
One of the things I liked, and it's hard not to like, is that they've scored 90-plus points in each of the first 3 games. And regardless of opponent, that's still an impressive feat.
Yeah.
And they've been highly effective and efficient in that scoring, which is very much what we know of David Riley coming over from Eastern Washington. That's exactly the sort of offense that they ran there. The schedule, they haven't played anybody really. And I know allowing 92 points to Portland State was a little bit, that is concerning. Like, I don't care if you score 100, 92 is a lot of points to that team.
Yeah.
But you're right. Cowart has been really good. Nate Calmise has been really good. The one addition the other night that was, I think, a big lift in that game was Andy Okafor coming back and being available, which adds to the depth of this squad. I mean, this is a big team. Ethan Price, 6'10". You have Dane Erickstrup, 6'11". Adding Andy Okafor to that group is going to be a big lift for them coming over from Cal. Big physical forward. He really, I think, helped them on the rebounding front, which has actually been an area they have struggled in the first few games. And in the WCC, we know it's like, you look at the top like 4 or 5 teams, like everyone is big, and you better rebound well against these teams: Gonzaga, St. Mary's, USF, Santa Clara. So there's definitely some optimism. And I really think the Bradley game was, I think, the bigger eye opener, because Bradley's supposed to be one of the better mid majors this season, and they just controlled that game from the get-go.
Yeah, I'm really excited about what we've seen from Wazoo. Oregon State, we probably don't need to spend as much time on them. I do like what we've seen from Mikey Lewis. He's, I think, a junior or senior now, and I think he's a strong all WCC candidate. Was a good player for them last year, averaging about 14-9 so far this season. Wazoo's got a nice test coming up. They're playing Iowa on Friday. That'll be a good game. Kind of their first, outside of Bradley, their first significant test. If they can win that one, especially by double digits, that's going to really help the Cougs. And then Oregon State, they take on Fullerton on Friday at home. They get Oregon after that, also at home. So that'll be a nice opportunity for Wayne Tinkle and the Beavers to pick up a marquee win. Zach, want to move on and talk about the bottom half of the WCC, the unfortunate part of this conference that can sometimes sort of drag down the schedules for the teams like Gonzaga and St. Mary's. We're going to talk about whether any of these teams can potentially elevate the bottom of this league and kind of potentially make the conference a little bit stronger. We're going to talk about that coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, going to live events is the absolute best, whether it's concerts, musical theater shows, comedy, anything like that. And finally, we have college sports back. Football is in full swing. Basketball is now a couple weeks into the season. I am looking forward to making a bunch of new memories this college sports season. Just got some tickets to some games coming up next week. And great news, when you're getting tickets for this year, Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so that you don't have to waste your time searching through thousands of tickets. Right now, tickets for Gonzaga versus Kentucky, who just picked up a massive win over Duke in the Champions Classic. That game, Mark Pope's going to be incredible at Climate Pledge Arena. Tickets are on sale on Game Time for just $62 a piece. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app now, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege, and you will get $20 off your first purchase. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Terms do apply. Download the Game Time app today. Last-minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. All right, Zach, closing out our show with the final 5 teams remaining in the WCC in the order of your power rankings. We have LMU, Pacific, San Diego, Pepperdine, and Portland. The Lions are 1-1 on the year. Their win is over a NAIA school. Their loss is a 15-point loss to Irvine. Javon Porter played really well against Irvine. We haven't seen a lot from the rest of that team up to this point. Pacific is 3-1 on the year. 2 of their wins are against non-Division I opponents, but they do have a 13-point victory over San Jose State and a 10-point loss to Hawaii. Been very impressed by a transfer who kind of followed Dave Smart from Canada. That would be Elias Ralph, who's averaging 17.5 points and 6.5 boards. DePaul transfer Elijah Fisher has been very good as well. The Toreros 1-2 on the year, a 1-point loss to Rider and a 9-point loss to Portland State, but they do have a 14-point win over Boston U. Junior college transfer KJ Bradley has been outstanding so far for Steve Lavin's team. Pepperdine's 1-1 on the year, 13-point win over Western Illinois, and then a big-time blowout loss on the road against UC San Diego. San Francisco transfer Stefan Todorovic has been lights out for Ed Schilling and the Waves, averaging 29 points through their first 2 games. He had 25 against Western Illinois and then 33 against UC San Diego. And then last and least, although they almost made a big headline, the Portland Pilots, they had just a 13-point win over a D3 school in Lewis and Clark. They had a 39-point loss to Santa Barbara. So there was not a lot of optimism for Shante Leggins and the Pilots going into a road game against Dana Altman and the Oregon Ducks. And yet Portland went into overtime. They actually blew a lead in that game and probably shouldn't have even been in overtime. Oregon ended up winning by 10. So the final score doesn't look so bad for the Ducks, but Portland had a chance to pick up a really, really big time win. Fun fact, that would have been the Big Ten's first road loss as a conference, or first home loss as a conference this season. Would not have guessed that the Pilots nearly were the ones to pull that one off. Zach, as opposed to going through all of these teams individually, because we're going to be here forever, if we do that, which of these teams have been the most impressive to you, or do you feel is the most likely to kind of challenge for the top half of the conference and kind of move in that right direction?
Well, I think there's 2 answers to that, because I feel like the team that has the who has impressed me the most of that group has been Pacific,
Mhm.
because this team, Coach Dave Smart has done a really good job of at least giving this squad an identity, because this is
Mhm.
a gritty team. Like,
Yeah.
they play hard. They are going to get at it. They don't do any one thing particularly well yet,
Mhm.
but you can tell that they're going to be scrappy. They're going to get at it. Think about the game against San Jose State. San Jose State, yes, overall is not a great team, but a far better team than what Pacific was a year ago.
Mhm.
And they got a win in that one.
Yeah.
They had to go on the road. They played Hawaii. And in that game, like, they had a lot of opportunities to win that game. And I think even if it's something as simple as they had opportunities to win a game and they let it slip away, is different than what it was a year ago, where there were not opportunities for them to win a
Mhm.
lot of these games. So also, again, you look at the number of power conference transfers that they brought into this program. You look at Lamar Washington, Elijah Fisher,
Mhm.
even bringing in Jazz Gardner coming over from Nevada. Like, you had added some depth to the squad. Jefferson Koulibaly, another guy. They brought in some pieces that are going to give them at least a little bit of a lift to place them above the Pepperdine's, the Portlands, and the San Diegos. Now, as
Mhm.
far as a team that's going to challenge for the top half, it still has to be LMU, because they have the talent.
Yeah.
And we're still waiting for that to come to fruition. And maybe it's just fool's gold to think that actually will happen with the
Mhm.
Lions. But on paper, they look the part, and we're just waiting for it to happen. But I don't know if just that vibe following Lorenzo Romar from Pepperdine to LMU just
Yeah.
kept with them, Javon Porter and everything. LMU has the talent. They're going to be the one that challenge the top half if there is one from that group. But Pacific's been the most impressive if I'm looking at it individually from that stage.
Yeah, I'd say for me, like, I obviously broke these teams up into 3 tiers because that's the format of the show. But if I were to do it in 4 tiers, I think it would be a little bit different. You'd probably have Gonzaga, St. Mary's would still be in their same tier, and then I think you would go San Francisco, Santa Clara, Washington State, and then I think you'd break it there, and then you would have Oregon State, LMU, and Pacific all in their own kind of tier, and then you'd close it out with San Diego, Pepperdine, and Portland. Because to me, looking at these bottom 5 teams, like 2 of them in LMU and Pacific do feel like they're kind of a cut above. And LMU, again, it's more of a belief in what they're capable of being and not really what we've seen from them up to this point. And at some point, if that continues to be the case, I think there's going to have to be some questions about Stan Johnson, who I was really optimistic about early in his tenure with the Lions, but it haven't been able to deliver recently. But a team that has Javon Porter, a team that has Myron Amy, who averaged over 15 a game at San Jose State last year, a team who has Mark Ovetsky, and then Jan Vide, who I think the breakout for Jan Vide, if it happens, feels like a huge catalyst for LMU potentially pushing past Oregon State, potentially even pushing in the top 5 of this league. And obviously it's only been 2 games for LMU, and one of them was against a non-D1 opponent, but against Irvine in that loss, Vide had 13 points. He was 5 of 9 from the field. Like, he's a guy who's a UCLA transfer, was pursued by Gonzaga as a recruit before he went to UCLA. He's a kid who could really make some strides and take some steps, and him and Porter would make a really strong duo with Amy at the point guard spot. And it's to the point where when you continually put together good rosters on paper and they're not delivering, like, Romar held on to his job at Pepperdine doing that for a really long time because he is a legacy at the school and was a great recruiter and things like that. But eventually you're going to make a move. And I'm starting to wonder with Stan Johnson, who seems like an outstanding guy from the conversations I've had with him. But this feels like a year where the roster's there. The roster's capable of being better than 6th or 7th in this league. And if that's where they finish, I'm not sure that he's going to have his job much longer.
Big one at St. Louis this weekend. So they're gonna get that test of, is the talent going to be able to show what it's capable of doing?
Yep, that's probably the biggest game that's coming up for any of these teams right now. We also have Pepperdine going at UC Irvine, who's looked very good in the Big West, so that'll be a good game. And then Portland going at Long Beach State, which will be a game of interest to Gonzaga fans. as they will be playing Long Beach State later that week. Zach, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate the WCC talk. It's always fun to get a look at how the conference is doing. I'm sure we'll have another conversation as we get into conference play, probably another conversation later into March as we get ready for the WCC tournament. But folks, that's going to wrap it up for us today here on the Locked On Zags podcast. We'll be back on Friday, getting you ready for that game against UMass Lowell. And then, of course, on Monday, we'll recap that game and get you ready for the big one that evening against the Aztecs of San Diego State. Folks, thank you so much for listening. And until next time, as always,